Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Grand Rounds today. Um, uh, uh, we apologize for our technical issues. Today's speaker is Dr. Barry Miller. He works for the world-renowned Virginia Tech Helmet Lab as a Director of Outreach and Business Development. He holds a PhD in biomechanics and also an MBA. He has over 20 years of work experience in various higher education roles that include teaching, research, administration, and business development. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Miller.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see my face for now. Thanks for having us. I'm happy to present on behalf of the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab. What I'm going to do is I have some PowerPoint slides, and to make it work the best, I'm going to stop sharing this part so you won't see me, but then I will stop occasionally so you can see me if I answer a question or I want to demonstrate something. But for the most part, you'll see the PowerPoint slides here. So in the interest of time, I guess we got to move on. So again, thanks for everybody for showing up so bright and early. Here we go. All right, can you guys see that just to make sure?
Yes.
Okay, Virginia Tech Helmet Lab. We are a comprehensive injury biomechanics lab. It was founded in 2007 from Drs. Stefan Duma and Steve Rosen. And the idea behind the Helmet Lab actually came about from the equipment room guys down in athletics asking Dr. Duma, who comes out of injury biomechanics and auto safety, can you help us pick a safer helmet? And you got to remember, that's 17 years ago. And, concussions were not really thought of much, and we didn't know what was really going on. So anyways, the idea to put sensors in a helmet and so we could quantify what happens during these head impacts, that was born. And then since then, we've done a lot of things, and I'll explain that as we move on here. So these are the full-time employees with the lab. Again, founders Stefan Duma and Steve Rosen. Mark Begonia is our director of testing, myself, and then Nicole Stark just finished her PhD, and she's now full-time with the lab, helping out with various projects, grant writing, etc. So we have a few entities that we work with closely. So again, up at the top here, Stefan Duma, Steve, Mark, myself, and then a couple of the PhDs that actually worked on some of the star ratings. For example, Megan Bland did the bicycle helmet star rating as her PhD or part of her PhD. Eamon did the youth football. Emily did some rugby stuff and mouthguard sensors. Ryan did some data analysis. And then Nicole finished up with some elderly studies in falls and residents, whether it be memory wards and things like that. So she did some interesting work with the elderly and falls. And Brett, Mike, Zach, they work with sports medicine down in athletics, and we still collect information with concussions, even though we don't use the sensors. Mark and Gunnar work for VCOM. They're physicians with VCOM, and we work closely with our sports med. And then Stephen LeConte and Allison, they work with the Carilion Biomedical Research Institute, and they do a lot of functional MRIs. So when we do some research with return to play, looking at what kind of brain tissue changes were there, et cetera, or function. So we work with those guys as well. Anyway, so some of the support we've gotten over the years, Jacqueline Mars of the Mars Corporation donated some money for the equestrian helmet study, along with this first entity, Hunter Jumper Association, USEF, USEA. We work with or get funded by the National Institutes of Health, et cetera, up here at the top. NCA, this was a big one. This helped fund a big, it's called the CARE Consortium, and a lot of research from a bunch of different institutions, whether it be on the clinical side, the return to play, sports medicine. That was a huge entity, and lots of institutions were part of that, and I'll show you a slide coming up. Lewis Foundation, Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, they donated money for the bike helmet study, and then obviously VCOM has donated some money along the way as well. So this isn't everybody, but a good, decent chunk of the donors we have. Again, so founded in 2007 by Stefan and Steve, we started instrumenting football helmets. And you guys may or may not know this. When you buy a helmet for anything in the United States or around the world, all the helmets have to be certified to some sort of standard. That standard is basically the point of catastrophic head injury. So we're talking skull fracture or death. So helmets must pass that. And that's really important. So it says basically if I wear a bike helmet for its intended person or purpose, so I'm riding a bike and I happen to fall off my bike and hit my head, well, the certification says I shouldn't get a skull fracture or die from that typical accident. Well, the helmet lab, we go a step further. And so those certifications are pass or fail. We go a step further. So we figure out, how do you hit your head when you fall off your bike? How do you hit your head playing football? How do you hit your head when you snow ski or ride a horse? And we figure out, what are those velocities? What's that energy? What are those angles? What kind of surface? And then we come back to the lab and create a sport-specific helmet analysis, a protocol to evaluate helmets against those real-world environments. And so currently we have 9 different STAR ratings, and STAR actually stands for the summation of tests for the analysis of risk. And I'll go through an equation that you guys will better understand what that means. But STAR, they use that formula for a lot of things. Auto safety, that's kind of where we grabbed it from, even though it's an acronym for us. But then in development, we have rugby headgear. And also we just launched a safety helmet, hard hats that construction and, worksite environments, they wear those kinds of helmets, and we're starting a research project on that. So we don't know everything, but we certainly do. Again, we're a comprehensive injury biomechanics lab, so we do all kinds of work. But our bread and butter is certainly concussion research and helmet evaluations. And in this picture over here on the top right, that's me in there. We do drone impact testing in conjunction with our Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership, who works directly with the FAA, but we're a FAA-approved impact testing facility. So, these commercial drones that are starting to be used in all kinds of applications, lots of insurance companies use them, and sooner or later, these drones are going to fail. So they want to know, if this drone comes out of the sky, hits your windshield, what's that going to look like? If it hits you in the head, hits you in the chest, you're walking your dog in the park, what's that look like? And what are the rules for these drones going to be? Like, how fast should they be allowed to go? How heavy? Blade length, blade speed, how frangible the drone is. If it hits you, it should fall apart. The geometry makes a big difference if it happened to hit you as well. So we're working with them to analyze all this kind of stuff and set some parameters and then test certain commercial drones to a standard that the FAA is working on. And then this picture in the bottom right, so that's a Nerf gun or Nerf that shoots these little Nerf darts. We do all the toy testing for the Hasbro toy company. And I didn't know this, but when my boys were young, the replacement darts are always much cheaper than the Nerf brand darts. And there's a big reason for that. So you probably can't see it on this picture, but the tips of a Nerf dart are a lot more compliant than the artificial or the fake darts. And so that's why they're more expensive. Rubber's a little bit more expensive to produce or manufacture than plastic, which tends to be a little bit stiffer and easier. But anyways, the tip makes a big difference, right? You want a nice compliant tip versus something that's a stiffer. And so we shoot these Nerf toys at specialized head forms. Even we use pig eye surrogates to figure out exactly what that looks like to help them reduce injury risk. So yeah, again, active research in all body parts. We don't know everything, but as we can decrease acceleration or force, then we're going to reduce injury risk. So can helmets reduce the risk of injury? And notice I put the word reduce, not eliminate. And certainly most of you guys, all physicians, this, that yes, helmets can reduce the risk of injury. We can't eliminate all injury risk, especially as it relates to concussion. But depending on the helmet, all products are a little bit different, right? So there's certain safety standards all cars have to meet, but that doesn't mean a Volvo's safer than a Fiat, right? Because there's different performance characteristics. And I'm going to show you guys some of these differences, major differences in the performance of all headgear that have met some sort of standard. So again, we have 9 star ratings. That's an equestrian helmet, a hockey helmet, a bike helmet, football helmet. This soft headgear here, if you can see my cursor, that's rugby headgear, flag football, even soccer. Goalies like to wear full headgear. And that's a snow sport helmet there. So as I mentioned, helmets have to be certified to a standard, but the standards are on a pass-fail basis at this point in time. And the only component or only measure they use is linear acceleration. And skull fractures happen somewhere around 275 or more G's of linear acceleration. And that's the criteria they generally use. They don't use rotational acceleration or head metrics at this point in time. Even there's a lot of talk from some of these certifying entities that they're going to include rotational acceleration, but there's probably a lot of debate on what the threshold should be. But the solution, if that's the problem, is create an environment-specific rating system. So figure out, how do people hit their heads on the job site? How do you hit your head, again, in ice hockey? And so we do that. We figure out how those things happen, and then we come up with a test protocol that's based on those real-world injury scenarios. All right, so acceleration-based brain injury. So we like to use acceleration as a metric to characterize concussion risk. Obviously, as your head accelerates, both linear and or rotationally, the movement of your brain inside, as it tries to maintain its position in the skull from either that pressure or the strain, causes concussion risk. So you want to minimize those rapid head movements in the big scheme of things. There's lots of experimental concussion research out there. There's cadaver data, and then down at the bottom, the result or the conclusion is linear and rotational acceleration increase, brain pressure and motion increase, and this enhances injury risk. And so that's the same for the cadaver, the animal data. The NFL started collecting data inside football helmets, and obviously I'll show you a couple slides here that we've been collecting data on football players since about 2003. So measuring head accelerations in humans. So again, we started equipping our football players with sensors. There's a picture on the right here, but I'm going to show you a little better one here, just so you guys can see what these look like. So I'm going to stop sharing momentarily. Can you guys see those red dots inside there? So those are sensors, accelerometers. So those sit right next to your skull. And so anytime we have these head impacts, and these helmeted head impacts are only 5 to 10 milliseconds. And so it's a challenge for a football helmet to attenuate that energy, but those sensors inside there are going to collect both linear and rotational movements. So linear, you have the x-axis, y-axis, z-axis, but then you also have rotations about all those axes, right? And anytime you hit your head, you're going to have a combination of both linear and rotational head accelerations. Even if that was a pure centric hit, you're going to have some sort of rotation. So we use a bivariate risk function. So we use both to calculate concussion risk in our analysis. So I'll go back to share. Yeah, if you guys have a question in the chat, just throw it in there and I'll try to make sure I see it. All right, so what have we found out? So we started off just us, but then there's a couple other institutions that joined this huge research project, part of the CARE consortium. And we've started collecting data. 2 million head impacts. Well, we have over 2 million head impacts by ourselves. I cut this graph off at 2012, but we collected data for a little bit longer. We don't use the sensors anymore. 2 million data points has not changed the risk function or what it looks like, and I'm going to show you that next. So, but lots of data are behind what we do. So this is a visual graphic of the risk function. So as linear and or rotational acceleration go up, your risk of concussion goes up, which makes total sense, right? And so just to put this in some sort of context, most of you have probably played soccer at some point in time. Well, the rebound from heading a soccer ball, your head acceleration might get to 40 G's of linear acceleration. So way down here, chance of concussion is really, really limited. This is just from a single impact. We're not talking repetitive, subconcussive hits and how they might affect injury risk. But yeah, so 40 G's of linear acceleration. If you jumped up and down as high as you could, you might get 6 G's of linear acceleration. And then I don't really have a good practical way to describe rotational acceleration, but these are very rapid, short as far as range of motion goes, but abrupt. And so, that 5,500 radians per second squared and somewhere around 120 G's is kind of where concussion risk really starts to ramp up. So this may look completely linear, but it's more of an S shape depending on where you are in this curve. And if you think about, 2 million data points big dot plot here. Obviously, when there's a concussion risk diagnosed by sports medicine, not by us, that's plotted. And then we really started looking at what were those G's and what were those rotational acceleration numbers that cause concussion. So, so again, never eliminate concussion. You could get a concussion at 6 G's if you had a pre-existing condition or something unusual, but chances or probability are pretty low. So the first big study we did, a 9-year study, obviously collecting data on football players at Virginia Tech. We instrumented the football helmet every practice, every game. So every head impact was recorded and analyzed and categorized. And after these basically 60,000 head impacts or so, we came up with the first ever ratings. And what we showed that a 1-star helmet has a much greater risk of concussion than those players wearing a 4-star or a highly protective helmet. And when we first launched, there was only one 5-star helmet on the market. And the reason for that is, again, the helmet companies had nothing to develop a helmet by other than the certification standard, which is linear acceleration only. They drop the helmet from a given height, given energy. If it's below 275 Gs, for the most part, somewhere in there, the helmet passes. But they didn't have any real world blueprint to figure out how else could we enhance the helmet. So as a result of our ratings, you can't buy anything but a 5-star helmet now. And the star scores, which I'm going to go through a little bit here, have drastically improved. So the helmets are fantastic now. The American football helmet is the most technically designed sport helmet on the market. So let's see here. So another article, Journal of Neurosurgery. Again, 4 stars drastically reduced risk compared to a 1-star helmet, by 54%. So the Virginia Tech Helmet Ratings Program. So 2 big objectives. Obviously, we're consumer facing. This is part of our public service mission, is to inform consumers on the relative difference between helmet performance in the context of concussion risk. And then the second component, which really helps the manufacturers, that we provide a blueprint for developing and a design tool to improve the helmets based on our test protocol, because they represent real world head impacts. All right, so the general STAR evaluation approach. Again, STAR stands for the summation of tests for the analysis of risk. So for each test, they're weighted based on how often they occur. Do you hit your head in football low energy to the front of your head versus high energy on the side of your head? Well, those have different frequencies, so we're going to weight those differently in the equation. And obviously, helmets that, and I think I mentioned this, helmets that lower the head accelerations from the head impacts we conduct here in the lab are going to reduce risk, and they're going to get better ratings. So we do, and as I mentioned, both linear and rotational head accelerations, right? So a bivariate risk function. Here's a quick little picture of our pendulum impactor that was designed for football helmets. And so the pendulum arm that actually does the impact the mass is basically the same as a football player, or roughly a football player. And then we can change out the impactor face to a mushroom shape, a flat shape, depending on what we're trying to simulate. Then we have a helmet Noxie head form. And we like to use the Noxie head form because that head form in particular was designed for sport helmets. And that's where most of our work is with sport. Then we have a surrogate neck, a hybrid 3 neck that comes out of the auto industry. And then that sliding mass represents the mass of another football player. So we're going to collide these and then evaluate, how much head accelerations from a given helmet model do we see. So the nice thing about the pendulum is if we take it to the same angle, elevate it to the same angle, we get a nice repeatable velocity at impact. And that's critical as we're differentiating between helmets. Helmet A is better than helmet B. So we need to be reliable, valid, and very consistent in our test procedures, because the companies get really upset if they think they have the #1 helmet, but we tell them that they do not. So, and every test rig is a little bit unique and designed to replicate those real world head impacts. So we have a couple different test rigs. That's one we use for football, ice hockey, and a few other sports. So the STAR formulation. All right, so the equation is, and this one's for football, it's the sum of 4 locations and 3 energy levels where we do the exposure as a function of location and velocity multiplied by that risk function. So we take the peak linear and rotational acceleration numbers from those head impacts, and we calculate concussion risk. And then we're going to multiply that by some sort of exposure or weighting value. And so what that gives us for each test condition is an incidence value. So again, down in the red box, exposure times risk. That's going to give us a number. And we're going to do that 12 times for varsity football, and then add all those up together. That gives you a star score. And so the star score represents concussion risk in some form or fashion. Every sport's different, so it's a little bit different for every sport. But for varsity tackle football, the star score represents the average number of concussions you would get wearing that helmet model if exposed to the 420 seasonal head impacts that are modeled by our test procedures here in the lab. And just so you know, some of the star scores of the best helmets now have values under 1.0. So the top performing helmets in our ratings basically say that on average, you're going to have less than one concussion if you wear that helmet model, if exposed to the seasonal average. And obviously, there's big differences in what position you play, what level of competition you're playing against, the type of practice you're exposed to. So all that's also been modified as a result of our ratings. So Pop Warner Football modified a bunch of rules, tackling drills, et cetera, where they're just trying to eliminate head impacts or minimize head impacts, which is, that's always the best way to go, is to don't hit your head. If you do hit your head, then, hopefully you have a high performing helmet on. So then, so the star score really drives what category you're going to be in. It's kind of like golf. The lowest score in golf gets the most money, and then it moves from there. So you want a low star score to put you in the number of stars, 5-star category being the best, 0-star or 1-star being the worst. And so the star score drives everything. So that just puts you in the appropriate bin. And the bins are kind of determined by maybe the standard deviations from the norm or some other protocol. Like, again, every sport's a little bit different, so they're not all quite the same. But here's a little sample. So not only do we do varsity football, we have a youth football helmet study we did. Dr. Campolitano did that 4 or 5 years here. And we collected data on our middle school football players here in Blacksburg. We put sensors in their helmets, did the same thing. The risk function is similar, but the energy levels at which those players get concussed or injured are much lower. So it's a different risk function for them versus the adults. But that graphic would hold true for the most part. The numbers would just be shifted. But what we've shown, 5-star compared to 0 stars, et cetera. So what we have here is a sample of linear acceleration for 3 different. This is just one at 4.9 meters per second. So the 3-star, the result was 130 Gs of linear acceleration. The 4-star reduced that by roughly 30 Gs, which is really big. And then the 5-star helmet even reduced it by about 70 Gs compared to that 3-star helmet. So again, when you can reduce acceleration values, you're going to reduce concussion risk. Same holds true for the rotational. And I should say, not always do we see both of the values go down at the same time. And so helmet companies often struggle with this. Hey, we reduced linear acceleration, but the rotational numbers either stayed the same or maybe even went up a little bit. Well, that surface friction, depending on what kind of test you're doing, makes a big difference. And so that bivariate risk function makes a huge difference. And especially when we talk about the Guardian caps and the Safer Sport helmet covers, which are really popular in the news right now. And I'll talk to that in a little bit here, I think. So in 2024, we have over 30 helmets. And you can't even buy, in football, you can't even buy anything but a 5-star helmet. So when we launched, again, there was only one 5-star helmet. The helmet companies went to work and better designed the helmets. And the star scores continue to drop, which is fantastic. Again, the most advanced sport helmet on the market. And so let's talk about, I'm going to show you a couple things, a couple helmets, just to show you can see some technologies in here. So I'm going to stop sharing. So again, here's the standard helmet shell that from probably the 70s even to just a few years ago, one big continuous solid surface shell. and then some sort of padding materials. Don't include the sensors, but some sort of vinyl nitrile. Obviously, different densities and thicknesses. They layer them somewhat, and so that was kind of the standard helmet. And then a few years ago, the Schutt F7. See those different pressure plates? So this is really a three-piece helmet shell. And the idea behind that is, if I get hit here on this pressure plate, that moves independently of the other parts of the helmet before it gets to the thick padding materials, before it gets to my head, before it moves my brain in my head. And so we call that the decoupling process, and you want that to happen. I compare this to the autosave. You see the crumple zone in your car. You want the car to start to absorb energy, that crumple zone, right? Even we're talking half a millisecond makes a big difference, because if I can increase the duration of the impact, obviously the peak acceleration curves they're gonna get flattened, right? The energy under the curve remains the same, but I'm not going to get this rapid peak. I'm going to get a little bit more fluid, more oval shaped curve, and you want that. You want to reduce those peaks. So if we can start the decoupling process, so in other words, the helmet's going to move independently of your head, even for half a millisecond. That's good. That's a good thing. And so you don't think of a football helmet decoupling, but it does. So as the helmet absorbs energy, starts to move independently of your head, the padding materials inside, and you guys can see huge padding structures inside here. And I'm gonna even pull this little, if I can do it here on hold with two hands, but see those little columns right there? So these things, they bend and twist. If I can get my fingers in there and show you, but it might be a little difficult. But those little columns right there, particularly those, they bend and twist. So they not only absorb energy from a linear or perpendicular, but they can absorb energy in an oblique. And so as they bend and twist, that helps the helmet, allows the helmet to better decouple from your head. But again, look at the big, thick padding materials. As a result of our helmet ratings, the helmets have gotten a little bit heavier, probably about an extra pound of padding material. More padding is generally better. And so that's the Schutt F7. And then I'll show you this one. This is the newer helmet. This is called the Riddell Axiom. And so you can see these big kind of cutouts in the helmet. Well, this whole helmet is kind of compliant. I can compress on this whole thing. And so Riddell has figured out that, if the whole helmet shell is a little bit more compliant, I can start the decoupling a little bit earlier. The helmet shell itself will start to absorb some energy before it gets to the, again, big, thick padding materials. And this one, I'm going to squeeze this so you guys can see it. This is almost like comfort foam on the part that sits next to your head. But if I peel that back, then there's a really dense layer, right, for the high energy impact. So it's layered with a variety of energy absorbing materials, mostly vinyl nitrile for this helmet model. But again, so big, robust, lots of padding. I wore a helmet in the 80s that didn't have much. The effects are hardly noticeable, but the advancements are fantastic. So I'll show you that one. And the Vices helmet that Pat Mahomes wears, it has a dual layered shell. So an outer layer shell and an inner layer shell. So similar, starts the decoupling process, absorb a little bit of energy, buy you a little bit more time, increase the duration and impact, which reduces those peak acceleration numbers. So I'm going to show you a couple bike helmets. So bike helmets are a little different. They're designed as what we call single impact helmets. Most of you guys have seen, basically it's this black stuff, the expanded foam, expanded polystyrene, really lightweight. It's designed to deform on impact if the energy level is high enough. So it'll crack, crush, crumble, and break, kind of like the crush zone in your car, to absorb energy before it moves your head. These are great for the high energy impacts. Bike helmets typically aren't as good at the low energy because to deform that material, you have to have a certain level of energy, right? This helmet's also equipped with what they call the Liat turbine system, 360. And so these little blue pucks are designed to be able to move and rotate. So the idea is that, if I have this on my head, those little blue knobs allow the helmet to decouple, right? So if I get hit, I want my helmet to move a little bit independently before it takes my head with it. And we call those rotational mitigating technologies. Many of you probably heard about MIPS. MIPS is, do I have one? I don't have one in here in the office handy, but MIPS is basically a plastic liner that goes between your head and the helmet, and it creates a slip plane. And so it, in theory, helps the helmet, allows the helmet to decouple a little bit easier. It may work sometimes. We don't think it's all that great because your head and your scalp and the way bike helmets fit in general, they're decoupled pretty easily. They're not so coupled like a football helmet on my head. So, but they may help. So, but that's one of the rotational technologies. And then I'm sure some of you, any cyclists out there. So in addition to EPS, that expanded foam, this green stuff, that's called wave cell. And this is also what they call a rotational mitigating technology. This stuff is a lot more compliant. I haven't again seen. So it's a little bit more flexible and pliable. And the idea behind this is that for those oblique hits, right, the geometry of that material allows it to absorb energy a little bit better, rotationally absorb and move versus a uniform EPS structure, which doesn't really probably allow it to absorb energy from those oblique or rotational type of hits. But that's wave cell. And then there's another material. There's lots of these companies now. This stuff is called Coroid. So another kind of honeycomb lattice type structure. And same thing, it's a little bit more pliable, stiffer than the wave cell, but again, the geometry allows it to absorb energy. And you can, I don't know if you can see some of the deformation right there at the bottom. And so the way it crushes, yeah, so it has the ability to do it a little bit better for those oblique impacts. But very lightweight, lots of ventilation. And I'll show you another one. Just this is kind of a great example of technology. So this is 720 protections. We tape the shell, but I want you to look on the inside here and see that huge honeycomb structure. And when the kids are in the lab and I give tours, I say, well, who would want to wear that helmet? Everyone says, well, no way. Look at the big crack in the helmet. Well, that doesn't make any difference because I'm going to peel this away and see that honeycomb structure. That's completely compliant. It's very robust. It does great with impact testing. And so this stuff I can even, as I squeeze this, you guys can see it's kind of rubbery, but the whole thing kind of bends and flexes, which is great and absorbs lots of energy. So the outer shell is just for aesthetics for the most part, maybe to give it a helmet-looking shell. But the Hexago technology is what they use. So this stuff is great. And there's a bunch of companies that have similar stuff to this. And so again, the whole thing is compliant, which does great. It's not legally sold in the US. It's EN certified, a European standard, but not CPSC for bike helmets at this point in time. But you can buy it online anyway. So pretty cool stuff. They make bike helmets, snow sport helmets. And then the other thing I'll show you. So for flag football, soccer, and now these Guardian caps. So soft headgear is what we call this. This is a soccer headband. So I wear this on my head, right? A little bit of foam padding or some sort of, this one's got gel in it. So soccer players, the worst case scenario is when two soccer players collide heads, a little bit of padding goes a long way, right? And so you'll start to see these soccer headbands used quite a bit. The goalies might use full headgear, like a complete version of this. Rugby players, flag football. As a side note, there's several Texas 7-on-7 leagues that mandate a Virginia Tech 4 or 5-star rated headgear. And so again, these foam pads, the density and thickness make a big difference. So you have some of these that don't perform well at all, but then you have some that perform really, really well. And so obviously the stiffer and thicker, usually a little bit better for this type of helmet cover or headgear. Then the Guardian cap actually just goes over the football helmet. So it's basically an elaborate version of this. And again, more padding is generally better. And we have a report on our webpage called the Shell Add-on Report that basically talks about, the Guardian caps can help reduce a little bit of acceleration. There's another company called the Safer Sport, and it's kind of a polyurethane shell. And they add those to the helmets as well. So yeah, it's kind of popular. Tua Tagovailoa for the Miami Dolphins had a few concussions, and but there's a lot of talk. Well, maybe he should have worn a Guardian cap or some other added shell protection cover, which again may have helped. So those are kind of the helmet types. Single impact, multi-impact. The only multi-impact really are the football and the hockey helmets at this point in time. And some of the hockey helmets, it's questionable how good they are at multiple impacts, but the American football helmet's fantastic. So our ratings, if you go to vt.edu/helmet, you'll see all of 9 different helmet ratings. There's research, there's test methodologies for each sport, how they all differ. I would certainly, if I'm buying a new helmet, I would refer to our website, have an idea what helmets are safer than others. We have a few more minutes. So I mentioned we're getting ready to develop a star rating for sport helmets. So I'm going to share once again. So same process. How do people hit their heads on the work site? According to the helmet manufacturers, they sell more hard hats or safety helmets than all the sports combined. And if you think about exposure, if you're an industrial worker of some sort, you wear a hard hat 8 hours a day, every day that you work. So that's a lot of exposure. You're on the job site versus, a football player that has practice for 2 hours, and maybe only, 40 minutes of those are actually contact time. So a lot of exposure. And so this is kind of how the whole process works. I want to thank JRGF, MECA, ASCC, and TALK for funding the project. But phase 1 is how do we figure out how they hit their heads in the real world? So we comb through the data, injury reports. If there's any videos of people actually getting hit, that does really helps us immensely. Injury report only tells you so much, but you don't know exactly what happened. They hit their shoulder first, they hit their shoulder, then their head. What really happened with that injury scenario? So want to study real world occupational head injuries, figure out how to hit their heads. Then we take that information after we comb through all that and develop a test method, which is phase 2, like best represents those real world falls. Then phase 3, which is the final phase, is test commercially available helmets against that test protocol, and then evaluate them and come up with a star rating score and mechanism, so consumers can see that and differentiate helmets in the real world. So I guess I'm supposed to give you 3 questions from what Megan told me. So here are your 3 questions. Can everybody see those? You're supposed to choose. I'm not sure, Megan, if I'm supposed to go through the answer or just let them choose first. So what does the acronym STAR stand for? System of Testing Acceleration Rates, Study of Traumatic Acceleration Rates, Summation of Tests for the Analysis of Risk, or Summation Testing of Acceleration Rates? Question number. I guess I can give you the answer. So C is the correct answer. Summation of tests for the analysis of risk. Once again, we come up with a number for every test condition. That location and energy develops or creates a incidence value, and then we add all those together. So it's a sum of all those incidence rates. So number 2, does a helmet certification mean a helmet is safe? So first answer means the helmet manufactured to consistent specifications. Or B, means the helmet has been tested to a series of tests and passed all of them. C, it means the helmet has met the minimum level of impact protection for catastrophic head injury. Or D, all the above. And of course, the answer actually is D, but this is kind of a trick question. Does the certification make the helmet safe? Yeah, safe for catastrophic head injury, but as I mentioned, as you guys saw, there's a huge difference in performance of various helmets, even though they've all met the minimum standards. So again, the Helmet Lab supplements those certifications with real-world sport-specific helmet ratings. So I would certainly refer to our website to have an idea which helmets, enhanced or greatly past those basic certification standards, which only use linear acceleration. And the last question, what's the duration of a typical helmeted impact? 1 to 2 seconds, 30 milliseconds, 3 to 5 milliseconds, or 5 to 10 milliseconds. Just as a reference point, when you guys blink your eyes, that's probably in the 20 milliseconds. So the answer is D. These typically are only 5 to 10 milliseconds, so really fast, rapid head movements, and obviously a challenge for a helmet to mitigate that energy in that short amount of time. But anyway, so we have about 10 minutes for question and answer or discussion, so I'll stop sharing at this point. Hopefully you guys saw something unique that you're probably not exposed to as physicians out there.
I have a question. Did I'm sure you considered.
Hold on. I'm gonna mute this one too.
I have a question.
Okay.
Be able to, so looking at these new helmets, what
Hold on.
through my head is how much more expensive.
It's feedback.
I could type it in too. But my question was, do you know the state of how these helmets are being easily adopted at like high school level sports? Because I was thinking how expensive some of these new ones look. And so, like, I remember I used those single piece helmets. That first one you held up, and looking at the different parts, has the price increased a lot? And are kids across the country using these better helmets, or has there been a lag there and they're still using a lot of the older ones?
That's a great question. So I do get a lot of calls from equipment manufacturers or youth football organizations asking about the helmet ratings and how best to pick a new helmet. So some of those people are buying for the whole organization. Some are just buying for their specific teams. The helmets have gotten a little bit more expensive. Price does not always indicate performance improvement. I would say, but for football helmets, it's kind of true. Bike helmets is all over the board. You can have a $300 helmet that's not very good. We have a couple 5-star bike helmets on our webpage for $59, $69 that are really good. So, but football helmets tend to be about $500 to $1,000. With the top performing ones are probably all on the higher end of that. But I always, if you buy a pair of cleats today, football cleats will probably run you $150 probably. And they only last half a season, if maybe a season. But these football helmets, they last 10 seasons. Obviously, some organizations, especially the youth and high school, have more funding than others. Some of the ones down in Mississippi, Louisiana, I hear calls from them, and they're still using helmets from way back when. It helps to have a better helmet without a doubt. There's some limitations funding wise for some of these organizations, but the information's out there. The football world's pretty educated on helmet performance for the most part. They use our star ratings. And just so you know, the NFL has its own helmet lab called BioCore at UVA. Those helmet tests are specifically for NFL level players. Our helmet ratings are for collegiate, high school, and even the youth players. So our helmet ratings are for the masses. But if you compared our helmet ratings, our varsity football helmets, to the NFL, you'd see the rank order of the helmets is pretty darn similar. They use a little bit higher energy levels than we do, obviously, because those players are bigger, stronger, faster. But the rank order of the helmets are pretty close. They use the similar test methods that we do. But again, they're testing just for NFL level, players and injury scenarios. So good question. But yeah, if you look at the bike helmet ratings, you'll see big price differences, but that doesn't always mean improved performance. So that's probably more true for the single impact helmets.
So, Russell Bonner.
No, just talk. We're good.
Okay. I have a question. You presented data on frontal head impact. You talked about tangential impact. I'm assuming you've done occipital or deceleration impact studies?
Well, for football, so what we really do is figure out how do you hit your head playing football. And so again, those 4 locations. So we do a front boss, a side, and then a back and a rear boss. So we do quite a few impact tests. Back of your head's pretty common. So we do a lot of those tests. Almost every helmet we test gets tested to the back. You fall off your bike, you land on the concrete and you have a little snap back. Those are common. Football players get hit in the back of the head, especially quarterbacks. So we do, I can't think of any test procedure or star rating that we don't do either directly the centric hit to the back of the head or just slightly oblique. So we call that a rear boss. So this is like a front boss, front boss side, and then rear boss, rear. Bike helmets, we also tested in the crown and a couple other spots up there. But so yeah, the back of the head's, I'd say always tested just about. I can't think of one that's not.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I'll also tell you another thing that's kind of interesting. It makes us unique. So the certifications are very slow to move. They don't change procedures much. But you know, being a consumer facing in a independent test lab, if we feel that the test protocol needs to be modified, we can do that because we're not certifying. We're rating helmets based on real world impacts. And so kind of we evolve, and these star ratings are in perpetuity. So as new helmets hit the market, we'll test rate them and put them to the website. And so once they're on the website, they don't come off the website. And so you can kind of see the evolution of the helmets. You might have to click on that specific helmet to see, you know, the date we tested it and what that model date is, because it's not always in the name. But we evolve, and an example of that is equestrian helmets. We're getting ready to modify that test protocol, even though it's only 2 years old, as a result of the FEI's recommendation to include oblique impacts in horse racing accidents, which we did not do previously. And so we're adding oblique impacts, and we're going to update that star rating test protocol, and hence the ratings will change. The rank order of the helmets will change too. So not much based, you know, the good helmets are still the good helmets, but so we're going to do that. So that's one advantage we have. You know, we can be nimble, we can be quick, we can respond to the new data. We're always science driven, but
Question: how important it is that the helmet actually fits to the child's head, like in terms of its safety protection, especially
that's
with bike helmets?
That's a great question. I get that a lot. So the primary function of fit is to keep that helmet in place for that initial impact. So fit is more for comfort than it is impact protection, because impact protection is primarily driven by the density and thickness of that helmet liner, helmet padding. And so as long as the helmet stays in place for that initial impact, it's done its job. Again, then the impact protection is going to come from the padding materials. So it needs to be snug enough that it stays in place, but not too tight where it's not very comfortable. So that's a great question. So fit's more for comfort than it is for impact protection, as long as it stays in place for that initial impact. You know, a bike helmet, once you get in a bike accident or hit your head, you're going to hit it, and then that helmet's probably going to slide down the side of your face. But that's not a bad thing, right? Unless there's a big secondary impact. A good question. We get that one a lot.
All right. Are there any questions in the chat? No. All right. I think we're good. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. You're welcome back anytime.
Yep. If you have further questions, you can find my email address online, bmiller21 down at the bottom. Happy to answer any questions and elaborate on something I skipped or wasn't very clear on. So, but thank you for having us, and hopefully go Hokies this week. It's been a rough start.
Hopefully.